Hello and welcome to the Inside Scoop with Pat Riley. I am the guest host, Michael Heelan, today, and we're also not in Rainham. We're at Foxborough Public Access Television. Our guest today is Sean Bielat, a Republican nominee for the 4th District congressionally in Massachusetts. Sean, how are you today?
Good. How about yourself?
Fantastic.
Excellent.
Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a Marine. I've spent 4 years on active duty. I've been in the reserve for about 10 years now. I did my undergraduate at Georgetown. I did a Master in Public Policy at Harvard, an MBA at the Wharton School of Business. Spent most of the past 10 years in business, first at a large management consulting firm focused on Fortune 100 corporations, helping them grow, helping them increase profitability and create jobs. Later at a high-tech startup here in Massachusetts, iRobot. I ran a $100 million line of defense robotics. They're used to go after roadside bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Great product, literally saving lives, based off of Massachusetts technology. I consulted independently to a number of small tech firms, and now I'm running an online startup devoted to nonpartisan political communication. So what I always talk about is how that ties into jobs in the economy. You know, we have so few people in Congress, so few people from the Massachusetts delegation who have actually worked in business, who have helped create jobs and grow companies. And when the number one issue that we're facing as a country today are those issues, then it probably makes sense to send some people down to the Congress who understand what works and what doesn't, what government should do and what it shouldn't do to allow the private sector to thrive. And also, I don't want to go down there for a career. I want to go down for a couple of years, do some good, come back to business. And I think that's an important thing as well. And then personally, my wife and I live in Norfolk, have 2 kids. One, Theodore, was born during the last election. He's 2 years old. And one, Serafina, was born last November. She's 9 months old.
Fantastic. The biggest concern right now with this election in the country, would you say unemployment and jobs?
Jobs in the economy.
Yeah.
And so in this district, if you go down to Fall River, there's almost 12% unemployment. Up in Brookline and Newton in the north, there's much lower unemployment, but they're also concerned about the economy. Anywhere you go in the district concerned about the economy affects people differently. But nevertheless, you know, there's these questions about growth and unemployment and uncertainty and what's coming next and when will this economy rebound. Number one issue by a mile.
Right. And then another issue, for those who do have jobs, energy, how to get to work, gas prices, how to heat your home, that kind of stuff.
Right.
What are your thoughts on drilling for oil, alternative energy, that kind of stuff?
I think most people who are being sort of level-headed about this will say the more energy sources, the better. Let's try a little bit of everything. Fracking has been extremely successful in allowing us to tap previously inaccessible natural gas and oil. And there's this reputation around it that is very negative. But if you actually look at the record, and this is from an EPA study, there's never been an incident of any sort of groundwater contamination or anything else happening that shouldn't under the surface. The only incidents involving fracking have all been surface containment issues, which exist in any energy production. So, you know, sloppy handling of things going onto trucks or into tanks or, you know, that sort of thing. So we have all these people upset about this safe approach to domestic production, and I think we should double down on that. I think we should increase investment in U.S. Energy production. But you know, also where it's economically viable, where it can be sustainable by the market, we should look at alternative energy. In California, when I was stationed out in San Diego, I would go sometimes from Miramar out into the desert to 29 Palms, and there's this one area you drive through where there must be 150 windmills. And it makes all the sense in the world out there because the land's super cheap, nobody's using it, the wind currents are right. Electricity in California is very expensive, so putting more power onto the grid is helpful. It makes sense there. Yeah. That doesn't mean it makes a lot of sense here in Massachusetts. So different answers, different places, no one-size-fits-all solution.
How long were you in San Diego for?
I was out there for 3 years.
You ever been to, this is off topic
completely,
but
sure.
Have you ever been to, there was a restaurant there where you cook your own steak? I went there, it was a good time. But this is completely off topic. But
I never went there.
All right, let's talk about some more issues. Obamacare and Medicare and how that's working. There's a lot of commercials on TV now talking about Republicans, Mitt Romney and Ryan want to stop Medicare or at least lessen it. What are your views on what Obamacare is doing and the future of Medicare?
Sure. Well, first of all, the Affordable Care Act / Obamacare has been, when you look at some of the reasons we're not growing, one of the big ones is uncertainty. And so 2/3 of small business owners say that they don't know what's in Obamacare. I think the other third are probably lying. None of us have a good handle on what's in there. It's this monster bill that was passed through without a whole lot of transparency. And even Nancy Pelosi, who at this time was Speaker of the House, said, we got to pass it to see, once we pass it, we'll see what's in it. It's that kind of mindset that we see much too much in Washington. So you have all this uncertainty created by Obamacare. You have something like 22 new taxes coming into play as a result. And you have a bunch of money being pulled out of Medicare. Hundreds of billions of dollars. People tell you different numbers, but somewhere between $500 and $700 billion coming out of Medicare as a result of the Affordable Care Act. So there's a real impact on Medicare, but even setting that aside, looking at just the long-term fiscal sustainability of the program, it's clear that if we don't start making changes now, it just won't be around. So there's two ways of looking at it. One is enabling, allowing the debt to continue to expand because we don't want to touch these programs because they're tough politically. Reform Medicare, reform Social Security, reform Medicaid, because those are tough political things. We haven't been doing them. If we don't do anything, the debt is just going to overwhelm us. We're going to look like Greece. We're all going to see our standards of living decrease as a result of the massive taxation that comes, the economic slowdown, et cetera, et cetera. But then the second reason to do reform, fundamental reform, is if you believe that we should have Medicare, which I do, if you believe that we should have Social Security, which I do and most Americans do, then we need reform. This isn't just about the financial side. This is also about allowing these programs to continue to exist, for us, for the next generation, and exist into the future. Anybody who's telling you we don't need to make a change is just not being honest about those two components.
And I know there's a huge deficit right now. And one of the ways to cut the deficit is to get rid of the majority of military spending. And as an ex-Marine, or actually, I'm sorry, a Marine currently, what are your views on military spending and the military in general?
Well, as you said, as a Marine, as somebody who studied international security, as somebody who's worked in the defense industry, I have very strong interest in national security. It's an area that I'm pretty passionate about. That being said, I'm also passionate about reducing the deficit. So when you look at discretionary spending, which is the spending that Congress approves year in and year out, defense is the biggest component. It's about half. So if you're serious about cutting spending, you have to look at defense. But what's been going on in this administration and among many in Congress is the first place they're starting is with cutting weapon systems, cutting troops, cutting combat capabilities. That's the last place we should be looking. The first place we should be looking is cutting defense bureaucracy, saving money in acquisitions, looking at other waste in the system, looking at healthcare costs. And so if you look at that stuff, we have an 800,000 person defense bureaucracy. It's grown by almost 70,000 in the past 3.5 years. At the same time this is growing by 70,000, we're talking about cutting 80,000 soldiers and Marines. Now for me, that's an easy decision. We should not be touching combat capabilities. We should be focused on the bureaucracy, on the acquisitions. But unfortunately, that stuff has large political constituencies. So people want to save those jobs in their district and not make the tough choices. It's much easier politically to get rid of troops, to get rid of tanks, to get rid of whatever. And we're looking in the wrong place. The very first place is that waste and unnecessary spending on defense bureaucracy. Once we get there, if there's still a need for savings, then let's carefully examine combat capabilities, but it shouldn't be the starting point.
So with the decrease in active soldiers, the increase in the bureaucracy, it's almost a wash.
Right, and in some ways, it's actually more expensive to maintain the civilian bureaucracies. Force sizes can change. When I was on active duty, Marine Corps was 172,000. During 2003, 2004, 2005, and the need in Iraq, it went up to 202,000. Now it's going back down. So it's not that hard to adjust force sizes. It's much harder to adjust the bureaucracy. Once those positions are created, it's very difficult to get rid of them for the political reasons that I talked about. Nobody wants to make those tough choices. So it's much easier to adjust the force sizes. So absolutely, it's tough. We can't get rid of them. We need to go after them, and we need to prevent further growth. The bureaucracy, I mean.
And recently in Afghanistan, there have been some suicide bombings.
and shootings.
And shootings, and for a while that looked like we were pulling out and their army was going to take over, and now it seems that their army might not be ready. Do you feel that it's right for us to pull out now? Is it right for us to leave it in the hands of their army, or?
Well, let me start by saying that our civilian leadership has failed our troops. Our soldiers and Marines there have done everything they've been asked, and they've done more, and they've done it well, and airmen and sailors. But this administration, the civilian leadership, has utterly failed them. So when the president was a candidate, he said we should pull out of Iraq right away. And so that he didn't get called soft on defense, he said, but the right war is Afghanistan, we should double down there. To fulfill that campaign promise, he surged troops in Afghanistan without a clear rationale, without a clear mission, and without a clear timetable. So we had all these troops go in without knowing what they're going to do. They're being pulled out now without knowing what they've accomplished. We're not sure what the end game is. So it's been a horrible waste of money, of troops, and it's tragic to see that sort of thing. We have a situation in Afghanistan that we're not going to be able to address. The Alexander the Great, the British, the Soviets all failed at creating a viable and strong nation state in Afghanistan. We're not going to be able to do it either. What we should focus on was our core interest in our national security, which is to take on terrorism. And to do that, you need a smaller, lighter force along the border regions, particularly along the border of Pakistan. You don't need this massive nation-building force that we've got there now. So the number one thing is to, make clear what our priorities are. We have a war going on. The president's not talking about it. He should be out there at the front saying, here's what we ought to be doing. So that's the number one thing. I disagree with the idea of a date certain of withdrawal, because as soon as you say we're leaving on June 1st, then the insurgents plan for that. They say, okay, great, June 2nd is when we're going to, get back in the game. That's not good for anyone. But right now it's just it's a mess, and it doesn't need to be.
And then you ran against Barney Frank a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Then shortly after the redistricting, he decided not to run again.
Right.
Do you feel that you were a huge part of that?
I think so. For 15 terms, he hadn't really had much of a challenge in November. In some cycles he literally didn't have a challenge. In others he did, but it was a pretty weak candidate. They hadn't raised money, they didn't have an organization, et cetera, et cetera. I gave him the first real significant challenge he had had in about close to 30 years. He had to work hard for his job. I don't think he enjoyed the process. In fact, I know he didn't, because he was quoted publicly saying, campaigning is one of the worst experiences humans can have short of physical pain, something very close to that. So he definitely didn't like the process, and this new district is much more balanced. It's not gerrymandered to protect him. It's much more of a 50-50 district. He could go either way. He would have had to work a lot harder, and I would have won. And I think he saw that, and I think he decided to sit it out.
And that's what my next question would be. With the redistricting, this district lost most of New Bedford and Fall River. And
all of New Bedford.
All New Bedford, most of Fall River?
We have about half, yeah.
Okay. How does this district now shape up demographically?
Well, it's much more, I don't want to say conservative, because this is still Massachusetts, but it's much more balanced. We picked up a number of suburban towns, which tend to vote Republican. Rentham, for example, Scott Brown's hometown, is now part of this district. Most of his former state Senate district is now in this district. In the House, in the Mass Assembly, there are 160 state reps. Of those, 33 are Republican. Of those, 8 are in this district. So this is one of the more Republican areas in the state. And where it's not Republican, there are a lot of voters who voting history shows that they tend to vote Republican even if they're not registered that way. So it's a much more fair district. It's more homogenous for the most part socioeconomically. The area, the Fall River and the surrounding towns are definitely still hurting the most. Every place is hurting, but they really feel it down there. Before, the entire South Coast was like that. Now, when you start going north from that area, you have a lot more towns that are suburban, that are similar to one another socioeconomically, until you get up into the north, and then you have Newton, Wellesley, Needham, Dover, Brookline, which are sort of their own thing. But that middle part there is very similar, and it's much Last time that was a much smaller group of towns. Now it's much larger, so it's a much more fair district, much more balanced, and I think it's it's a step in the right direction in terms of redistricting in Massachusetts.
And now, do you think that with Scott Brown's win in the last election for Senate, does that shift the politics in Massachusetts to more Republican?
I think it does, and it's for this reason. So for decades, Massachusetts has been majority independent or close to it. So most Massachusetts voters are registered unenrolled, which means they have not chosen to be a Democrat or a Republican. Now, when you had several decades of strong Democratic majorities, people who wouldn't, even under those circumstances, even when the only person on the ballot was a Democrat, people who wouldn't call themselves Democrats, what they were saying was, I want a choice. They're not saying I want to vote Republican necessarily, but I want a choice. And what you saw in the Scott Brown election was exactly that. You had two strong candidates on the ballot, and people had, for the first time in a while, a good option other than the Democrat. What you saw in my race was something very similar. About 2/3 of independents voted for me versus Barney. What you're seeing down ballot and all the state rep races, same thing. People want choices. That doesn't mean they're always going to go Republican. I hope they do. I hope they come my direction, but I hope that everybody has the chance to sit and look at two candidates, two sets of ideas, two individuals, and say, okay, that's the one I want, independent of party. And I think Scott Brown's race helped move that dynamic forward.
And then just to stick with, right now, Scott Brown and Elizabeth Warren are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising and for the Senate seat. How much does money have to play in the Senate seat? And I know that in the congressional seat, there are there are candidates running with a lot less money and some that have a lot more money.
Right.
How do you think that plays out?
Well, they say half of all money spent in politics is wasted. The tough part is figuring out which half. And so throwing a lot of money on TV is thought to have an impact, probably does have an impact. The question is, at what point do you get diminishing returns? You know, what is enough versus what is just too much, what is gratuitous? I think at the presidential level, at the Senate level, by the time we hit November, people are just going to be tired of hearing about it. I think that's already starting. At the congressional, I'm not going to be relying on paid TV. That's not my strategy. It wasn't last time. And Joe Kennedy can spend circles around me buying commercials. You know, that's what he's been good at. That's really what he's focused his campaign on, is raising money. He's going to spend a lot. We're going to get to a certain point, and then beyond that, everything we're doing is focused on field work. It's focused on grassroots. If you go over to our headquarters next door, you'll see that there are volunteers in there right now making phone calls, doing voter ID, doing all the things you need, the nuts and bolts you need to win a campaign. We're running a very different thing. We'll be up on TV, we'll be up on the radio. It's not going to be in the same quantity as some of the other candidates you see, because that's not what we need to do to win.
And then now your campaign headquarters is right here in Foxborough.
Correct.
And you said before we started taping that you visited several other towns and been on public access television. How do you focus what you're doing on the national level to accommodate each of these individual towns, which are, you know, the difference between Newton and Fall River?
Right.
There's a very big margin of what they need and what they're looking for. How do you accommodate all these different towns in the district?
By going around and talking to people, by doing town halls. We have one tonight in Franklin where we just open it up to the public. I take questions and answers. I talk a little bit about what it is that, you know, I'm running on. And it's a good way to hear about the concerns of the community. I've done a lot of business visits around the district because, again, those are the people creating the jobs, so it's great to know what's on their minds and what's helping, what's hurting them. I've talked to, you know, having done this 2 years ago, and half the towns are the same between this district and the old district. I had the chance to get to know a lot of people, get to hear what they're interested in, and I've kept in touch since. So it's getting out and talking to people. I mean, it's, you know, day in and day out, going to events, doing things. When I look at what's on the calendars of other candidates, I can tell you I've been doing that a whole lot more than they have. You know, I heard recently Joe Kennedy said he's done 160 events, and that was why he was qualified to be in Congress. Well, if you look at his website, if you count fundraisers and, you know, the phone bank he's had in his office, maybe you get close to that number, but otherwise it's just not happening. My other two primary candidates, by contrast, actually have been around a lot. they've been doing what I have, which is getting out and talking to people. So if your campaign strategy is to just spend a lot on commercials, you don't need to do that. If your campaign strategy is to talk to voters and get them out and do the grassroots stuff, that's what we're doing day in and day out.
And then after talking to constituents in all these different towns, what are the major issues right now facing people in the district?
Jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy.
Okay.
After that, a distant second is fiscal responsibility, the deficit, the debt. And then the third is just kind of this larger question of what's our vision for government, and that encompasses a broad array of issues. But by far, jobs in the economy is number one.
And then, I know you spoke of this a little bit before, but the economy and jobs, in order to create more jobs in this region and in the country in general, what are the best options to do that? What are some of your plans to help push the economy in the right direction?
So there are two things. First, stimulus, but stimulus by letting people keep their money, giving people and businesses back their money, because no matter how smart, no matter how hardworking, no matter how knowledgeable someone in Washington is, they don't know as well as you do what you need. It's just impossible. So a family is always going to know better whether they need to pay down a credit card or buy a new car or send somebody to college. Government can't know that. A business is always going to know whether they need a new piece of equipment or hire a new employee or whatever. So by letting individuals make those choices, you're going to have better outcomes. So that's part one, stimulus by letting people keep their own money. Part two is regulation. I'm not talking about good regulation or bad, more regulation or less. I'm talking about predictability. And right now it's just lacking. People don't know what's coming, and I've had versions of this conversation 100 times, which is me talking to a small business owner who says, I could hire somebody right now, but I'm not. And the reason I'm not is because I don't know how much healthcare is going to cost me. I don't know what my taxes are going to be next year. I don't know what workers' comp is going to look like. So I'm holding off. I'm keeping my cash out of the game. I'm not hiring. And for them, that's the right decision because they don't know what's coming. So one of the things we need to do as a government, one of the things I want to do when I get down to Washington is help provide more certainty, help people know what's coming, be very explicit with when a regulation is going to go into effect, what the actual impacts on individuals are going to be of legislation. And if you can't explain that, then you shouldn't be passing the legislation.
And then other than, of course, jobs in the economy, sustainability financially, what other the main topics right now facing the country, both locally and also nationally? Right.
So after fiscal sustainability, which we talked about, entitlements and discretionary spending, I talk about this question of vision of what government should be doing. And this encompasses a lot of areas. One side at the extreme, there's black. It's not all black and white. It's gray. But one side at the extreme says government has the answers. It knows better than you do how to spend money. It knows better than you do about what you need, about whether you should drink this size cola or that size cola, like we saw in New York City. Just trust us. We know what you need. Give us your money. We'll spend it for you, et cetera, et cetera. The other side says, no, this is about individuals. It's about personal, individual freedom to excel, to invest, to grow, to succeed on your own merits and hard work. It says that government should be small. It should do the necessary functions. Where possible, push power down to states and localities where it's easier to get in touch with your representative and they can, better represent you. And it says, look, yeah, we do need a social safety net, absolutely, but it needs to be as small as possible. It needs to support those that truly in need and not be these expansive programs which aren't affordable and which ultimately are going to hurt those most in need. So it's two very different visions of government. I represent that second vision. I represent the vision that says we need a more focused government, a government focused on the things that we actually need and can afford. And so that's what I'm talking about. And like I said, there are a number of issues that fall under that, and people seem to be responding.
And then we're almost out of time here, but real quickly, what sets you apart from both your Republican primary candidates and whoever may come out of the Democratic primary when it comes to the seat in this area?
Well, there is in this race really no one else who's spent much time in business writ large. So I'm not saying that there's a couple of people who have private sector experience, which is great. It's phenomenal. We need that. But don't necessarily have experience outside of their particular industry, medical practice. Joe Kennedy has 2 years of work experience, during which time he worked as an assistant district attorney. And that is, there's nothing wrong with that, that's good, but it isn't the private sector experience we need. We don't need more attorneys in Congress. We need people who have some experience outside of that, who have experience creating jobs, growing the economy, people who aren't going to be down there for a career. When you think Kennedy, you think career. Bielat, not so much, So I want to go down there for a couple terms and come back. I'm being very clear about where I stand on the issues. I'm happy to answer questions about it. I talk about issues. I can't tell you where Kennedy stands on anything because he doesn't talk about issues. He doesn't go in front of cameras. He doesn't do radio appearances. He doesn't talk to newspapers. I've had reporter after reporter after reporter say that to me. I'm out there, I'm talking about things. If you want to know about Sean Bielat, come to my website, seanforcongress.com. Come to one of my town halls, ask me questions. I am more than happy to answer because that's what I feel my role will be in Congress. So those are some of the things that set me apart. Background, Marine and business, philosophy and view of government, and accessibility.
Now, you do radio interviews on a regular basis. Let me rephrase the question. Do you have a regular weekly radio station you deal with, or is it just?
I try to arrange call-ins or in-studio appearances 3 or 4 times a week when I can. After the primary, I think there will be more. This morning I was on WPRO in Rhode Island. The Providence market hits most of the district. So we do some stuff down in Providence. So I'm on radio multiple times a week, and then where we can, we do TV and we do print media, talking to journalists almost every day.
And all of your town hall meetings, your radio appearances, are all on your website, Facebook?
Correct. Yep.
You have a Facebook, a Twitter, all that stuff?
All that stuff, yeah. Sean Bielat on Facebook, seanforcongress.com, @SeanBielat on Twitter. I know we're out there publicly because the Democratic State Committee sends somebody to film every event that we do.
Okay.
We've got a tracker. So they're certainly aware of my appearances, and they're very easy to find, seanforcongress.com.
It's like a local TMZ guy.
Exactly.
All right, we have 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more question about, this came up in the news a couple of weeks ago. You're now fundraising for Joseph Kennedy as well, to buy him office supplies. Can you explain on that a little bit?
Well, that was obviously tongue-in-cheek,
yeah.
But so Joe Kennedy has raised more money than almost anyone in Congress. Alan West and John Boehner were the only 2 people who raised more than him in his first 10 weeks. Yep. He's got the Kennedy machine behind him, Kennedy money, raising millions. And they put out a couple of releases to their supporters where they said, we need office supplies. Come donate paper and mops and dish racks and all these other things. And it was absurd. It was just absurd. They're trying to portray themselves as this grassroots campaign. More power to them. They're raising a lot of money, but then don't try to pretend it's something it's not. So we put out a little thing and made a joke about, we're raising money because they clearly need it. We'll donate some money for office supplies. Just poking fun. I don't have anything personally against Joe Kennedy. I just don't see, how he's explained his candidacy. I see him spending millions trying to win. I have a problem with process more than anything else. Let's have a fair debate. Let's talk about issues, not focus on the silly stuff.
Excellent. And then anything else you'd like to say to the people before we sign off?
Well, I hope you've had a chance to hear a little bit about my candidacy today, about my campaign. I hope you'll come to seanforcongress.com and take a look. I hope you'll consider my background versus that of my opponent. I hope you'll not be overwhelmed by the amount of commercials you're going to see, and really think about the issues, hear from the candidates, and decide on November 6th. Come out and vote for Sean Bielat.
And finally, I'd like to thank you for, this is my first time doing this, and I will be doing some more with other candidates and yourself in the future. And I hope you all enjoyed it.